to tell you more about it right now. So let's give a big HSGP welcome to Shelly Gordon. Come on up, Shelly.
Thank you. Can you hear me? My mic's great. I'm nervous, but I'm so happy to be here. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And this is a conversation about education, particularly in Arizona. But it's not, it may not go according to what you think I may be talking about. I may surprise you. Hopefully I will. So first, let me just say a little bit about ROSAmerica, which stands for Revealing Origin Stories of America. We're going to talk a lot about origin stories as part of the large American story. So what do? We are a 501c3 nonprofit in Arizona, pardon me, and we deliver professional development programs that prepare teachers to teach the range of origin stories and multiple histories that reflect not only our complex history, but also the students that populate Arizona classrooms. And I'll talk a little bit about the statistics of that. Our aim is also to challenge the dominant narratives about our history. And, you know, we know what some of those are. We've heard, you know, we've gotten an earful, and I'll talk about that in a minute too. But to really open the door to teaching, like I said, there's wide range. There are many origin stories that contribute to the larger American story. And so that's who we are. And before I launch into a presentation, which I have, I want to say that, I mean, I know I'm talking to probably a more homogeneous group in terms of your politics, but I don't want to assume anything. And I'll just say, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, you know, we've all been bombarded by all kinds of news about bad things going on in education in our state and other red states. You know, what is the latest thing that Ron DeSantis just did around education? And, you know, we get, pardon me, we get reports about book bans, and, you know, there's over 2,000 titles that have been banned from school libraries. And our teachers teaching critical race theory, oh my God, and what is it, and what isn't it? And you know, are we woke, are we not woke? I mean, and this is hitting us every day. So, and then we all, like I said, we may fall in different parts of that emotional spectrum. I guess that's how I would describe it. You know, infuriates us, and it outrages us. Or we're nervous and we want to know what our kid is learning in class. And, you know, we want to know every moment of every day. I mean, there's a parent's bill of rights in Arizona where the parent has a right to know exactly what the teacher's doing moment by moment in class, among all the other things they have to be prepared to do. Or are they teaching my child, you know, the hard history of the dark side of American history, and is it going to offend my white child? I mean, there's that part of it too. Am I speaking the language here? So first of all, so there's that. And I forgot to ask this question. Are there any teachers or retired teachers in the room? Wonderful. Yay. Thank you. Thank you for the work you do. So I've actually been doing some volunteer work in a kindergarten class. Oh my God, they are so freaking cute. And by the way, in that class, so this is a class in a school in Central Phoenix. There's 20 students, 5 of whom are white, and the rest are students of color. Hispanic, Latinx, Black, Asian American. So that leads me to my next statement, is that while all this fury is going on in state legislatures and, you know, in other places and in homes, there are other things that I think we should be paying attention to. And I guess that's why I seized the opportunity to come today, which is student learning being attacked. And so I'm going to show you a video in just a minute, and you're going to hear directly from students about that. But first, I want to say over half the students in Arizona classrooms are not white. They're predominantly Latinx, Black, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Indigenous. In addition to that, the dropout rates are highest across the country among Black, Pacific Islander, Latinx students. Students of color tend to lose interest in schools and perform poorly when they don't see themselves in the curriculum. And that is changing. And it's changing across the country, but nobody's talking about it because it's all been obfuscated by this noise that is taking up room in our brains. On the other hand, these same students flourish when classroom lessons are culturally relevant and racially inclusive. I'm quoting that. This was a study done by the American Education Association, which is one of the teachers' unions, and a group of law firms. I don't remember the name of the group, but they did a study of teachers across the country, and that's the focus of ROSAmerica. That's what we care about, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey. But if you want to know what students care about, I'm going to show you this video. Hopefully this will work. Help. So it's not, oh, there we go. Okay. All right. No, we're good. We're good. All right. So I'm going to say a little bit about this video. It's about 4 minutes long, which sounds long, but it'll go fast. And these are fifth graders. Not coming.
Project on for you?
Yes. Okay. These are fifth graders in an elementary school in Salt Lake City who produced this 4-minute video. And they actually have their own YouTube channel. It's called Ninth Evermore. And if you ask the teacher why it's called that, he says, I have no idea. It was up to them. They wrote the script. These are 11 and 12-year-olds. Is it working?
It's warming up.
Okay. All right.
I think it went to sleep. I think I talked too long.
I think I talked too long. Oh, there we go. Anyway, it's they wrote the script, they wrote the music, they wrote the lyrics, they produced it under the guidance of the teacher, but they did all the heavy lifting. So watch this, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. Let me open the screen up. And here we go.
Why do you think adults are afraid of teaching you about hard things?
Because they think we're not ready, but we are.
We were watching the news the other day and we saw this story on kids and social media.
People keep saying that kids are depressed.
Why do you think that is?
The world is scary.
COVID-19, social media,
Maturation. Not admitting when I'm hurting.
my eyes were red when I cried, but I just said I was on my phone too much.
There are more ways to bully kids than there used to be.
You used to just punch somebody or kick them, but now there are so many ways people can hurt you.
I don't want that for myself.
Something filled up my heart
What do you think adults are worried about?
with nothing.
I think adults are just afraid of what we're gonna learn.
Someone
You can scar them for life with things they're not supposed to know.
told me not to cry.
I think they want to protect us from awful things and bad information. Still, it makes no sense.
What do you mean?
Now that
We're kids.
We're curious.
I'm older,
We're still learning all these things, just without support.
my heart
If you tell us there's something we shouldn't know, we'll go out and find the worst version of it.
and I can
The world's more complicated now.
say that it's a lie.
We have access to all information and each other anytime we want.
It's here on our phones.
It's hard for adults to help us because no one's ever grown up with this.
Maybe the problem is that you want to prepare us for the world as it was when you were a kid, instead of the world as it is today.
What should we be teaching you then?
How to argue without getting angry. Teach us to have disagreements without freaking out.
We needed to teach us how to talk about hard things.
We just need adults we trust to share the truth with us.
Children, wake up, hold your mistake up before they
Is school the right place to be talking about these tough things?
¿Dónde más se supone que debemos aprender a hacer del mundo un lugar mejor que en la escuela?
If that's not the point of school, then what is?
if the children don't grow up, our bodies get bigger, but our hearts get torn up.
This is school. This is where we're supposed to learn hard things and then use what we learn to fix problems. School is supposed to make you more successful, right? School is where we learn to be leaders in our community. We need people to tell us what's wrong and why it's wrong so we can fix it.
Teach us scary things where it's safe in our classroom.
It's like that story we saw about students not being able to read certain books or talk about certain things because they're scary. Teach us,
Guide us.
believe in us. You can't protect us, but you can prepare us.
If I'm not taught about global warming, that won't stop the globe from warming.
I think it's healthy to recognize that some of the world's problems come from here,
Why?
because then we can do better.
It's overwhelming, but we'll figure it out.
We have to make social media the solution, not the problem.
Now the whole world is connected and all of us can stand up and learn together.
We have more tools than any generation before.
We're the most likely to solve the world's biggest problems.
Any last thoughts?
Wake up to the pain in yourself and others.
Help others find some joy.
¿Qué pasa si somos los héroes que hemos estado esperando?
I know I'm going to start. Every time I watch that, I get choked up. So I'd just love to hear, what did you hear? What did you hear from the students? Anybody? Just a couple of comments. Awesomeness. Good. Right. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
Not nearly scared the adults.
Right? It's the adults. It's not the students. Who are we protecting? I mean, that's what comes up for me. So anyway, I just thought that, that would kind of set the stage for what I'm about to talk about. So let me bring up my presentation. Whoops. You didn't see this. I'm going to put it in, let's see, presentation mode. Here we go. I don't want this on here. Oh my God. All right. I'm going to start again. Yeah, I don't want this, my notes on there. I'm not sure how to get rid of that. Oh, you're not seeing them. Oh, oh, technology. Okay. All right. So as I said, ROSAmerica, we're all about, yes, we're one country, but there's many stories. And students deserve to know those stories, particularly the students of color who've been left out of that story. So they're more invested in their education when they see themselves and their ancestors in our country's origin stories. So, I knew this was going to happen. Oh, wait a minute. Does this work? Let's see. Maybe it's this way. Okay. So my journey with all of this, why did I start doing this? It starts with something that has engendered a lot of controversy in our country, the 1619 Project. So is anyone familiar with the 1619 Project? A lot of you are. So this was a case of, this happened in December of 2019, which feels like a century ago. I mean, my God, it's hard to imagine life before COVID, life before many things. I happen to be scrolling through on my phone, the New York Times. I'm a subscriber. And you know how when you're reading, I don't know if this is true for you, when you're reading on your phone and you're reading like a newspaper or a daily media outlet, and then you get all these interruptions, moving videos and advertisements, and you're like, get away, I just want to read the article. But this popped up and it was like an interesting interruption. And so I bought a copy of the magazine and I read it, and it changed me. I had been to the National Museum of African American Culture and History in Washington, but somehow this perspective really changed me. That's all I can say. It was very transforming. And why? Because the articles and the premise of the publication, first of all, it came out in August 19th of 1619, because that is the anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans to this country. And so, the Times looked at this as an opportunity to tell a different story, a different narrative about our country. It's not like it's this against everything else, but it challenges our idea of what is central to the American narrative. Is it the arrival of the first enslaved people from Africa versus the Revolutionary War and the founding fathers who were slave owners? And I thought that was really interesting and also very provocative, and also like, maybe so. Why, try it on. That's how I looked at it. And the articles in the magazine, there's 10 articles, there's essays, there's artwork, it's a great read, if nothing else. It's a work of journalistic artistry. But the other part of it is that it looks at all the institutions that make up America and says, if it wasn't for slavery or enslaving humans as a foundation, all of those institutions, our economic might, I know we have a debt ceiling. I know there's all that, but let's face it, we are the richest country in the world still. And, our education, our mass incarceration, our criminal justice system, health, housing, the design of our highways and, in our suburbs and cities and why they're all separated and the policies that have been informed by racism, all of that can be traced back to slavery and the racism that kept it in place for 250 years. The other thing about the 1619 Project is it places the consequences and the contributions of Black Americans at the center of democracy. It was the Black Americans who fought for democracy. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the civil rights movement. And then, to understand our history, to teach the multifaceted history of the United States is to create a better future among the students that we're teaching. So that's a little bit about, and I'll give you one example. Can I do it this way? No, I have to go this way. Okay. So this is, I just did this kind of collage of some of the articles, but I want to draw your attention to the image in the upper left. This is a sepia-toned image of Wall Street in the early 20th century. What one of the articles contends is that Wall Street started with the plantation. It did not start in the buildings of New York City. And it was a very mechanized system. So the other thing I want to say about, people that we enslaved, that is also kind of, not even talked about in our textbooks, which is that these were human beings who had lives. These were people who lived in Africa, in different countries. They were mothers and fathers. They were teachers. They were farmers. They were scientists. They were scholars. There's all kinds of research. So anyway, just to backtrack there, but these different articles, the one that I'm talking about is the plantation, and it was a very mechanized system. So they would assess. They actually will say that this is kind of the first kind of accounting happened on the plantation, where they would make an assessment of the body of the person who was picking cotton. Of course, men would get a higher quota than women. And then they would assign quotas. And, if you can imagine 3 football fields and just rows and rows of enslaved humans, as far as the eye can see, and they would be assigned these quotas. And if they didn't make their quotas, they would be whipped in the shortfall. So if they missed their quota by, 5 pounds, they would get 5 lashes, 25 pounds, 25 lashes. It was that mechanized. This was not just gratuitous violence. This was systematized atrocities. So I know I'm being passionate about this because, one of the quotes in the magazine is, we lived under an economy whose bottom gear was torture. And that's what we did. So that's hard to reckon. And people want to talk about other things or ignore it and say, we should ban books, instead of saying this happened in the country and we should know about it. So, they talk about, in one of the articles, the modern mortgage system. What do we think of when we think of mortgages? We think of real estate. We think of buildings. Humans were the first to be mortgaged in this country. They were trafficked and they were mortgaged. And, their bodies, what they say, the description of how their bodies made money and made people very wealthy is a big part of that. So anyway, that's the 1619 Project. So what happened with that? I said, okay, I got to do something about this. That's part of who I am. I couldn't just put the magazine back on a coffee table and say, well, that was an interesting read. And it turned out that there's an organization called the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, not related to the Pulitzer Prize, but it is about reporting and journalism. They actually started to provide lesson plans to enable teachers to teach the 1619 Project in classrooms. And anyway, long story short, I, reached out to a friend. I said, read this, call me. And we decided that we wanted to get this into Arizona classrooms. And we put a presentation together and we started contacting school boards and administrators, and they wanted to meet with us. I have to say, it surprised me. I am not an educator, but it was intriguing. And, teachers at the time were looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, and how they could be more inclusive of the students of color in their classrooms. Because as I said, more than half the students in Arizona classrooms are students of color. So we met with them, and one of the schools we met with, the school is Balls Elementary School District. It's a school district in Phoenix, BALSZ is how it's pronounced, spelled. And it's an K-8 school district. And we met with the president of the governing board and the superintendent, the first Black woman to be hired as superintendent. And she said, I want the 1619 project in my school. I want my teachers, 175 teachers, to go through this training. And she looked at us and we looked at each other and we said, okay. We didn't know how that was going to happen. So we contacted the Pulitzer Center and we collaborated. We actually collaborated with one of the schools at ASU, the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, if anyone's heard of that school. And we did a 6-month program, once a month. And we did that program. It was a very successful program. The teachers were like blown away. They didn't know half the things that they learned. And we got pushback. We got backlash. We got 2 legislators. One of them ran for Secretary of State, Mark Fincham, you may recognize that name, and another legislator were incensed, and they wrote a letter to the president of ASU and to the superintendent and said, how dare you teach this? And we said, thank you for sharing. And we did it anyway. So that's what happened there. So we did that program, and that kind of set us on our journey. So I'm putting up this slide because this woman who I met as part of, along the journey, along the way, Christina Sneed, she's a middle school teacher in a suburb of St. Louis. She's one of the first teachers to teach the 1619 project. And I love what she says, and it's a lot of reading, and I know you're trying to read it, so I'm going to read it to you. So according to Christina Sneed, her students were not interested in talking about any of this. They thought racism ended with the civil rights movement, which, by the way, one of the legislators who complained said that in an article. He said, racism is over. The civil rights movement happened. Why are we talking about this? So this got passed on to some of her students. She wanted to engage her students in hard conversations. And she said, what I had in mind was bigger than skill sets and doing better on tests, better test scores. She wanted them to be, to impact their identity and their hearts. She wanted them to be forever changed by the 1619 project. And she said to her students, she said, I'm not going to get up here in front of you and tell you about one of the articles and then have you go home and write about it, and then we're going to have a test. I'm going to be a co-learner, and we're going to go on this journey together. And I love that. She was not getting up there as the authority, now, spoon feeding content to her students. And so she did do that. And then she said they were so enriched and passionate about, became so passionate about the project. They would have these Socratic circles and kids would be crying. And, she said it got emotional. They were very invested and very engaged and curious and hungry and all the things that are up there. She says, teachers have a responsibility to put rich and powerful texts in front of their students and teach them to inquire and interrogate and research, and not to believe, but to actually do their own research. And that was the invitation that she gave them with the 1619 project. Go out, and other teachers too who taught this, go out and find out for yourself. See what you can find out, and analyze it, draw inferences, draw your own conclusions. And by the end of that experience, these kids went before the school board in their school district and demanded that the school governing board add this to their curriculum. And they did a whole presentation. They had artwork, and they wrote, and so it was really passionate. And I love this last quote of hers, where she says, it is not our responsibility to sell students on a certain history. We teach students how to think, not what to think. And that's what's happening in schools, but you will never know it if you just read mainstream media. So again, as you can see, I'm passionate about this, but that I think is the crux of what we should be trying to accomplish in schools with our students. So the other component that we focus on with ROSAmerica is there's two actually. So what I'm saying here, actually, I jumped ahead, is this all is codified into something called inquiry-based learning, which is, this is what engages students to discover their need to question, their ability to create solutions that transform the world around them, that they, it's a lot about questions now, what they call compelling and supporting questions. That's a lot of what is happening in classrooms. And teachers are using more of what they call primary source materials. So they're not just relying on textbooks, which, what we call facts and figures, holidays and heroes. It's really about getting materials from museums and teaching those. And it's way more interesting for the kids. I saw this video, just as an aside, where there was a map from the 1800s, and each student was handed a pair of a magnifying glass. And the teacher said to them, what are you not seeing with the naked eye that you can see with this magnifying glass, and what does it mean to you? And they loved it. They all sit around, they talk to each other, and it's about observation. And to me, it's like it's almost like, wow, I wish they did this when I was in school, because it's an exciting time to be a student. So as I said, inquiry starts with a compelling question, and then students are encouraged to move through an investigation, and that culminates in some kind of action. So that's one of the hallmarks, and that's one of the things we focus on. The second hallmark is something called culturally relevant pedagogy. Is anyone familiar with this term? Great. Culturally relevant pedagogy was something that was, it's a philosophy that was generated by Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who's also one of the co-authors of critical race theory, teaches at University of Wisconsin in Madison. And she observed there was a number of Black students who were at risk, at risk of dropping out, not doing well. But these teachers, under these particular teachers, they were flourishing, and she wanted to know why. And so she distilled these 3 points from what she learned about these teachers. So first of all, student learning is number one, but a particular kind of learning. They're not just they're not just consumers of information. They're learning to grow intellectually and to develop a moral compass, to develop their own set of ethics, their own integrity, and also their ability to problem solve and to reason. So that's one. The second one is cultural competence, for students to begin to appreciate and really affirm their own culture and one other. She says, be fluent in your own culture, but also one other. And that's kind of where ROSAmerica focuses. And then the third component is critical consciousness, which is the ability to identify, analyze, and solve real world problems, especially those that result in inequality or inequity. And that's what happened when Christina Sneed's class started to look into the 1619 project. They wanted to make changes. So those are kind of the two hallmarks of culturally relevant pedagogy. So everybody with me so far? I know a lot of information to absorb, but so when we formed ROSAmerica, we realized that, again, we wanted to offer teachers the breadth of origin stories, not just the Black American, in addition to the Black American story. So we did a survey, and we wanted to know if teachers agreed, or if they, how they felt about culturally relevant pedagogy, if they even knew what it meant, and was it on their radar. So over 95% of the teachers said, yes, this is a priority for us. So I'll just read these. On the top bubble, it says, it is essential for kids to have an education that affirms and supports every child. It is important as a history teacher to make sure true history is being taught. In the bubble on the lower left, I continue to research for ways to engage students in culturally relevant material and examination of all sources, of all kinds of sources, to teach them to become critical participants in society. So these teachers think, their job is to turn out great students who are going to change the world. And finally, without recognizing and valuing the cultures of students, and including their cultures in the curriculum, they will not engage as fully as they can. So out of that, this is kind of how we see this is sort of our roadmap for ROSAmerica. So first of all, in the upper left corner, students of color connect to the material. When they connect to the material, the learning takes off. I heard another teacher say, when essentially the same thing, when students of color see themselves in the learning materials, the test scores take care of themselves. I love that quote. You know, it's not about getting them to be more proficient. In Arizona students of color, as I said, make up more than half of students in school classrooms. So the need for culturally relevant and inclusive pedagogy is vital to engaging all students. And, you know, in these kinds of classes, students develop a stronger sense of themselves. Their ancestors are included in the lesson plans, and they perform better academically and graduate at higher rates. And we know that many teachers, you know, I've just talked about this, who go beyond teaching from textbooks and adding primary sources and personal histories to reflect all the voices and perspectives of our nation's origin stories. But our vision is, what if every teacher taught that way? What if they all saw, you know, how would that affect students? Would joy and equity and cultural relevance be at the center of their educational experience? Would their faith in their education grow? Would academic achievement improve? Could we begin to create historical empathy in students so they connect emotionally with the material, not just intellectually? So that's kind of our vision. And then finally, and then I'm going to get to some lesson plans, just to give you some examples of their origin stories and how they're taught. So what we say is to respectfully consider the perspectives of North America's first inhabitants before, during, and after the arrival of European settler colonialism, to understand how enslaving human beings really shaped America's institutions, as I said before, to discover how LGBTQIA+ and people of color and women all contributed to the development and success of our country and are integral to the American story. And then to study people of current events and history as the flawed humans they are, not as mythologized people of perfection. And I want to read a quote here. Is anyone familiar, or everyone, with Ta-Nehisi Coates? Do people know who he is? He is a journalist, writes for the Atlantic magazine, and I think of him as kind of the James Baldwin of the 21st century. He's a brilliant thinker and writer. And this is what he says. I always tell people, when you're talking about Thomas Jefferson, he was brilliant, certainly had attributes that we would describe as good. George Washington had attributes that we would describe as courageous, gave up the presidency, didn't declare himself king. But what does it mean to know that without enslavement, without the exploitation of Black labor, without labor guaranteed through torture, these men would not exist as we know them today? What does it mean to know that your founder's occupation was slaveholding? It's difficult. It changes the history. It removes America and the American project from the place that we've traditionally held it and puts it down here in the valley of normal, everyday human beings. And who are you when you're down there? Like, what are you? What is special now? What is your identity? What are you then, if not the first in the world's oldest democracy? So I just love that quote. So now I'm going to shift. I want to give you a couple of examples of what we mean when we talk about, teaching origin stories. So first of all, we pose the question, who are the people who've been marginalized? Could some of our students be their descendants? And who are the great contributors and builders of this nation who have been left out of the story that we tell ourselves about our country? So in this slide, just to point out a couple of, and these are actual photographs, obviously, or images. So in the upper left corner, this is a group of Japanese internment camp, people who are behind bars, essentially, in a Japanese internment camp. And then this picture here, this is a indigenous woman who is sitting alongside a rug that she's weaving. And to the right of her, this is obviously women suffragettes who changed history. This is a picture of people who, they are undocumented immigrants who are being held at gunpoint and deported. That's what that image is. And then this lower left image, this is the first Black Americans who were elected to public office after the Civil War and during Reconstruction and before the Jim Crow laws were implemented. So our goal here is to bring the experiences of our nation's underrepresented ancestors to the classroom. So this picture, I assume everyone's familiar with the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the SPLC has a kind of an arm in their organization called Learning for Justice. And they put out a magazine, I think it's quarterly. And I just happened to, I made a contribution. And this is, by the way, this is kind of how all this came together. It's a lot of random acts of discovery. And so I happened to, I made a contribution to SPLC and I got a copy of the Learning for Justice magazine. And I read this article and it talks about how the civil rights movement is essentially talked about in school. It's Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, who didn't get up from her seat to somebody else, got arrested. And, there was the Edmund, there's this sort of like these landmark events that took place. But what Learning for Justice says is that it's kind of what they call the master narrative. And it goes something like this. The civil rights movement begins in 1954 when the US Supreme Court concedes that legislation is wrong. Then Black Americans engage in noble acts of nonviolent protest led by Martin Luther King. This eventually receives the unwavering support of President Lyndon Johnson, who signed into law the Civil Rights Act to end racial discrimination once and for all. And Southern whites finally admit that racism is morally wrong, but Black Americans are dissatisfied and undermine the movement by rejecting nonviolence, shunning well-meaning whites, and embracing Black power. Finally, in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King is killed, effectively ending the movement. But thankfully, by that time, America has essentially righted its racial wrongs, thereby leveling the playing field for future generations and paving the way for the first Black president. And that's kind of how we talk about it. So what the Learning for Justice is saying in this article is that it gives teachers tools for teaching a much more complex, nonlinear, nationwide movement. There was all kinds of movements happening all over the country that culminated. So they call it into the civil rights movement. They call it Civil Rights Movement, a framework for teaching the Black freedom struggle, which expands, like I said, the geographic and ideological boundaries with people involved across the country fighting for, disability rights, for economic justice, for voting rights, et cetera. So it's a complex story and there's more to it than the way it's been taught. So that's just one example. This came from the PBS Learning Media. So PBS Learning Media has become a source for teachers to draw upon for teaching. And I know this writing is very small, but I'll just tell you quickly that this is the ROSAmerica. I finally learned how to pronounce it. That's how you pronounce it. So I've learned this recently, that names that Indigenous people use are not pronounced phonetically like they would be if you were, if you were English. So ROSAmerica, that's the correct way to pronounce the name of this tribe. And they referred to the saguaro as the Oshaw, also not pronounced exactly as it's spelled. And the fruit of the Oshaw is called bija. So the fruit is harvested in June and July, and they use the saguaro ribs and creosote sticks. And then that's, that is processed. They make all these different foods with it, jam, gruel, even intoxicating beverages. And then when it's open, they rub the fruit on themselves, on their necks and hearts, expressing their appreciation for the creator. And all the fruit carcasses are left at the foot of the saguaro to give thanks to the plant and to the creator. And so the students are taught, I got to put on my glasses for this because I don't know if you can even read it, but this is a lesson plan. And it's they get a video, a discussion, there's questions, there's art activity, there's native vocabulary, and this is for 3rd to 5th graders. So they're learning this at a young age, and this is from Arizona. So the next one is this is interesting. This is also from the PBS Learning Media, and this is an Asian American story that parallels Brown versus Board of Education. So this is a family that emigrated here from China in the late 1800s, brought their family, obviously, but one of their children was born in the US And when it was time to enroll them in school, they said, and this is San Francisco, by the way, we think of San Francisco as being progressive. They were told, I'm sorry, only white children can come to this school and your child's not allowed. And they sued. And their case went all the way to the state Supreme Court of California, and they won. And so this is a Asian American version of Brown versus Board of Education. In other words, that's an example of what we don't learn in schools, and that would be interesting for kids to know as well, particularly students of Asian American descent. And then there's a lesson plan that accompanies this, which is for 4th to 6th graders, where they're invited to see, okay, they may not be an immigrant in their classroom, but they've done something where they had to change their circumstances. They moved to a new town, or they started a new school or a new grade or something. And so they're invited to explore, what was that like for you? And then, they look at Brown v. Board of Education versus tapes and the California Supreme Court. So I love that lesson. I think that's, interesting. So those are just some examples of some examples of origin stories and how they're taught in classrooms. And then this is just a slide of some of the partners that we've created over the years, or a couple of years that we've been, we're fledgling up organization, so we haven't been around that long, but we have a partnership with the Smithsonian Learning Lab, with Buffalo Public Schools, which has developed what they call their emancipation curriculum, which reflects, the students of color in their classrooms. The Southern Poverty Law Center, Learning for Justice, they've actually done some programs for teachers in Arizona. The Asian American Education Project, that's a new partner, and we're working with them. And the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, who I mentioned earlier. So, and then we also, we have a partnership with one of the students at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at ASU, who is going to be doing, who does focus groups for us to find out what is the impact that this work is having on teachers. This is something that, and I'm almost done here. So this is something that we're launching our first summer institute. And the whole idea of it is to give teachers kind of a full palette of origin stories and different ways to teach them. And we've brought in predominantly educators of color to teach teachers. And most of the teachers in Arizona are white, female. And that's just what's so. So we wanted to expose them to all these different ways of learning. So one of the things that we start with is, what may be holding you back in your view of your students that may hold back their own learning. And there's an interesting kind of reverse, I guess I would call it reverse racism. There's this, I actually was having lunch with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and she said, and you've heard this before, Asian American students are usually the smartest kids in the class. And that kind of bias will sometimes neglect those students in need, because there's already this assumption that they'll figure it out because they're so smart, or because they have helicopter mothers or whatever, these terrible things that we say. So anyway, she's going to unpack all that, and that's one program. And then we have two people that are going to be delving into culturally relevant pedagogy that I talked about. So and one of them is the emancipation curriculum from Buffalo Public Schools, where something like over 60 or over 70% of Black and Latinx students were dropping out. And they said, we got to fix this. We got to do something about this. So they created this whole culturally responsive curriculum, starting in preschool all the way up to 12th grade. And that's going to be part of that program. Then we have a professor at ASU who's Indigenous, and he's going to teach a class on how to teach arithmetic through an Indigenous lens. I think that is going to be so interesting. And then the Pulitzer Center is going to come in and they actually will bring in journalists and talk about how do you teach your kids to investigate like an investigative reporter. So that's going to be two of the courses that we're going to lead, including media literacy, hearing from an investigative journalist on how to teach media literacy. This has become very important in schools, as you can imagine. And then I gave that example of the tape family. So we have somebody from the Asian American Education Project talking about how do you incorporate Asian Pacific Islander Desi American. Desi refers to South Asia, Indian, Pakistan, that part of Asia, and how do you incorporate that into everyday teaching? And then we have somebody coming in who's going to show teachers the Smithsonian Learning Lab is teachers can create their own collections from the 9 properties that fall under the Smithsonian roof or umbrella. So they will be able to teach their students how to do this. And I see that there's one missing here, which is critically important, which is, and it's not this last bullet, the teacher who worked with the kids to make that video, he's going to teach a class on how do you teach your students to create their own digital passion projects. And that's what he's going to teach them. So, and then the person that I mentioned from Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, she's going to do a focus group because, it's important that we track the efficacy of our work. So, and these are the presenters. So I don't need to spend time on that. That's who they are. And they're on our website. And I'll just end with this quote from Lonnie Bunch III, who is the secretary of the Smithsonian Institute, the first Black man to be hired in that position. Let us use history to inspire us to push a country forward, to help us believe that all things are possible, and to demand that a country live up to its stated ideals. Yeah. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you so much, Shelly. Hang around just a second. We're going to get to Q&A right now. If you're watching online and you have a question, please drop it in the live chat and we will get it, put it to our presenter. If you have a question in the room, in just a moment, go ahead and put your hand up and we'll kind of go around the room and take some questions. I certainly have some after that presentation. Nothing bad, I promise. It's all just, informative stuff. But just a quick reminder for those of you watching online to make sure that you like and subscribe. Visit us at hsgp.org. Find us on Meetup. Do all the different things with all the different buttons on your screen right now and become part of this cool thing that we're doing all the time here at HSGP. So at this point, let's go ahead and move into our Q&A segment. This was the first hand I saw come up, so we're going to come straight over here.
Well, thank you. This all seems like good stuff, but to some people, it's going to be dangerous, be seen as dangerous, which you mentioned. And I'm just wondering, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure that's on everybody's mind. We are proceeding. We're doing the Summer Institute. We have almost 30 teachers that are attending. Schools around the state. In fact, I don't remember her name, the woman who is working, is with the kids right now. Sarah Jones. She is head of her school's diversity, equity, and inclusion program. And she's not alone. So there are teachers all over the country. And I guess, you could call it, we're gonna work our way into the classrooms and teach us. And, this state did try to pass legislation to basically, shut teachers up so they wouldn't teach. And they didn't pass 2 years in a row, these bills. And I think it didn't even come up this session. Other crappy, pardon my language, bills, did come up. They did pass this Parents' Bill of Rights. The other thing that happened, I'll just say this is interesting to me. So when Kathy Hoffman was the superintendent of public instruction, they stripped her of a lot of her authority. Well, now you've got the complete other end of the spectrum, Tom Horn, in that position, and he doesn't have much authority. So he cannot fire teachers. He can write op-eds like he did recently, which said that critical race theory is sneaking its way into the classroom. And it's like, we wrote back and said, students do not need your protection, Tom Horn. So anyway.
I just wanted to say that I think it seems like to me you're developing a pretty strong curriculum. That is going to help. That is help.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what our focus is. How do you build this and how do you add this to the curriculum and get, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I took history, it was like, oh God, I got to go home and memorize some stuff I'm going to promptly forget after the test. I've heard so many people say I hated history when I was in school, and now they love it because of, the way they're being taught to learn how to think. So thank you for the question.
All right, got another question here from Ms. Helen. Go ahead.
In that last slide, you had a list of some goals or something, and there was something about teaching math and
yes.
I'm curious about that, but I also had a quick comment.
Okay.
I hear about, this critical race theory, and they misinterpret critical as criticizing. And also other things about, they don't want to hear about it. Well, I never saw this movie. I think it's Top Gun, where someone says, you can't handle the truth. That seems to be the case.
That was Tom Cruise, but not, yeah, what was that movie?
Few Good Men.
Yeah.
Few Good Men, great.
Few Good Men, that's right. I love that movie. I think that's right. I think that's right. You know, you can't handle the truth. And why is that so upsetting? Why is it so threatening? I think it's so interesting. I don't know. So, and the Indigenous teacher, you know, the Michael Littlecrow is his name. He's teaching that class. And I don't know what it is. It just sounded fascinating. He said, I'm going to have them love math in their hearts by the time I'm done. And I said, you're in, you know, we want you. And he created this workbook, and, you know, he's going to come and teach it. Oh. Yeah, you know, I don't know if he, you know, maybe I'll tell him you should do a course for all of us who are math challenged in addition to that, because I know he does do that program. So.
All right, we got another question back here we're going to go to.
Hi, do you know Dr. Ann Schneider from ASU?
Sounds familiar, but haven't met her.
Okay, she's a retired professor.
Okay.
And our book group took her book for the book for the month, and it is Discontinuing Racial Inequality in America, Essays on Race in the US.
Thank you.
And we not only had the book as our book of the month, we had Dr. Ann Schneider come to lunch with us. So I am going to try really hard to introduce you to Dr. Schneider.
Oh, thank you. I'm definitely.
Okay. And the question I asked her, critical race theory, the word critical can mean it's really, really important, or critical can mean we're criticizing.
Right.
And I asked her which one that actually meant, and she said both.
Yep.
Very clever.
Thank you. I was going to say it's both in this case.
All righty, you got another question from back here?
Thank you. I'm super excited to be I'm going to be participating in June.
Hi,
Yeah,
Lacey.
Hi. Hi.
She's doing our summer institute. Woohoo.
Yeah, I'm training to be a teacher. So, so I was wondering, I'm very excited about all of the discussions and what we're going to be covering. But I was wondering is there any plans to maybe incorporate any discussions on disability or neurodivergency, because that is a culture in itself. And I personally, as someone with ADHD, I feel like that gets lost in a lot of conversations about diversity and about cultural competency, things like that, because that is a culture unto itself. And it's a marginalized group that I think gets forgotten a lot. I'm not trying to be critical. I just not that type of critical.
That's I'm writing this down because you know, we have a facilitator, and I'm going to bring this up to him. You know, this is our first one. Obviously, there's going to be room for improvement, you know, when we're done with this. So, but I appreciate what you're telling me, and I made note of it. So we'll see if there's a way to do that, or at least acknowledge that that is another culture in our history. Thank you.
All righty. Do we have any more?
Looks like there's a question.
Oh my goodness. Okay. And this looks like an important one because it's from Kat. So.
I was wondering, I had to pick between two questions since I'm only supposed to ask one, but so are you getting any interested instructors for this summer's institute from any charter schools?
Oh yeah, charter, private, public. And we reached out to rural schools, because I think that's where, you know, the Phoenix metro area, Tucson Unified School District, they're progressive, but we wanted to make sure that we also had representation, and we do. So, you know, it's not statewide, it's not every county, but you know, that was definitely an emphasis for us to make sure that we had a broad spectrum. And Roger looks like he has a question.
Oh, it's from Roger. I don't know about that.
It's his fault I'm here.
Hi, so you showed the national organizations that you're partnered with.
Yeah.
And what I was wondering, I kind of missed this. Does ROSAmerica focus just in Arizona? And if so, are there other states or is there a national organization that's in the works?
Yeah, good question. Our partners are all over the country, but we are focused on Arizona. You know, there's basically two of us, and we would like to expand. You know, as I said, we're a fledgling, organization, but we don't have the bandwidth. And I think, you know, if we can make a dent here in Arizona, then we have something to go. You know, it's kind of like this is the lab, and then we go to other, you know, particularly red states where they're shutting down. You know, assaulting education. That's my language for it. So thanks for the question. But yeah, we're starting here and then hope to branch out.
All right. And closing out, I have a couple of questions, one of which is not my own question. It's a standard one that we ask. So anyway, the first one is actually pretty straightforward. During your presentation, you brought up a slide that showed that you did a sample of teachers and 95% said that it would be better for them to do culturally relevant and inclusive stuff, right? Who did your organization conduct that survey?
We worked with Arizona Humanities, and they actually gave us the population, and then we conducted the survey.
So is that Arizona teachers?
Yeah.
Or is that okay?
Yeah, only Arizona teachers.
Okay. All right. And then my actual question, I just wanted to know procedural. I'm a studies and numbers guy. So anyway, a lot of what you talked about, you were mentioning that when we find ways to connect the material with students, that they just do much, much better.
Yeah.
And I agree. Obviously, that makes sense. But what do you do in circumstances where it's something that we believe should be part of the curriculum because people need to know about it, but the student has absolutely no connection to it? Are we just going to say, well, you know, you personally don't really care about the Vietnam War or Alexander the Great or whatever. So because it means nothing to you, we're not going to bother teaching you or testing you on it. So how do you approach a situation where there just really is no way to get a student to connect with a particular issue because they just don't have any interest in it? Should they still be taught that material?
Oh boy, that's a good one. I guess my response is not everybody's going to be interested. You know, it's like, you know, this is a philosophy. This is a framework for teaching. And some kids are going to thrive. Some kids are going to be, you know, totally engaged, and others will still be like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here because so I can read, you know, play games and look at my phone. I don't know, you know, I think if, you know, we're creating a critical mass here. If you get enough people to say, you know, they'll bring the others along. But I think, you know, you're right. I mean, we're not a homogeneous, we're not a monolith. You know, students have their own choices, their own personalities, but the studies show that when the material is culturally relevant, the test scores speak for the, you know, take care of themselves. So why not engage in that? And maybe not everything you teach is going to be within that philosophy, but we can, you know, we can start there. So
absolutely. Thank you for the response on that. And the last thing I'm going to ask is for individuals who are here today or folks who are joining us online or in the future when they're watching this on YouTube, how can somebody who is part of this discussion right here, right now, how can they get more involved and stay up to date and participate and help accomplish the goals?
I love that question. info@rosamerica.us. ROS. I guess I didn't put that. ROSAMERICA. It's not ROSE. So it's ROSAmerica.us. And we'd love to, you know, if you're interested, you want to know more, if you want to get involved, love to talk to you.
All right. So once again, thank you so much, Shelly. Stay put because we have a cool thing we like to do at the end here. But for those of you joining us online, once again, if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe. Be part of what we're doing here at HSGP. Find us on Meetup. Find us at hsgp.org, where you can become a member of the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix. I did it. Don't you want to grow up to be just like me? No, it's worked out pretty well for me, the breakfast and everything. Thank you guys so much for making us part of your day. And we sure look forward to seeing you at future HSGP events, whether you join us online or in person. It doesn't matter as long as you want to be part of this cool thing we're doing here, because we are moving forward and we want you all to move forward with us. So